Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hunting for Silver Linings. Today is Monday, March 8 over here in the Great Lakes region of the United States. I'm the chapter director for Grand Rapids, Michigan for Startup Grind. We're also joined here with Yorgo. Are you still in Oklahoma City? Or are you? All right, very good, cool. And then we also joined today by our very special guest, the first conversation we've had with the director from Israel. Yep, and we have Tal here from Central Israel. So grateful to have you with us.
It's great to be here, guys. Can't
So
wait.
we do this series for a couple different reasons. One, we really want to introduce you to the community of other chapter directors, but also other innovators, investors, and different ecosystem stakeholders around the planet who might be interested in what's happening in your region. Also want to maybe tap into the innovation that you have in your area. So kind of a large audience, but we are deeply curious about you personally and your history. You're an author, you're a teacher, you're an advocate, you're an entrepreneur. You do all the things. So maybe just brag a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a man of many talents, as you said. But being a startup grind chapter director is like the icing on the cake. It's been an amazing adventure so far. What I do basically is, like you said, I used to teach at the business school right here in Rishon Lezion for a while. I did that for almost 5 years. I quit doing that a couple of years back, but I do teach nowadays in Hochschule Neu-Ulm, which is the Neu-Ulm University of Applied Sciences in Germany, in Bavaria. I teach a course about Israel as a startup nation. It used to be a physical course. Nowadays, it's a virtual course, obviously, because those students can't fly over here. So I can't take them to see all the cool stuff in Israel, which we're going to probably talk about quite soon. Um, I also have my own company. We deal a lot with Agritech. This is something also I'm probably going to talk a lot about during our conversation. We feel it's the path to the future. We kind of see today um, something that we might have missed before the pandemic, how important agriculture really is and how we must promote it in order to survive as a human race. So we promote a lot of Israeli agriculture technologies, especially in the US, but also in South America and other locations. That's something that I do via my other company, which is Renovation Group. I also deal with shipping. That's what I used to do. I did it also in the States back in 2005, 2006, 2007. Um, and just like you said, I've written two novels. These novels are very exciting. It's alternative history in a world where the Carthaginians beat Rome, basically. So they are the powerhouse in the world. And now what?
Mhm.
Okay, and I'm right now trying to finish the third part of the series and then start to publish it on Amazon. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, there's a lot in the nutshell. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Um, and I particularly I enjoy that genre, the alternative history. You know, that's a lot of fun, uh, especially when we try to think of being futurists. Also, that goes hand in hand with what could be, right, and especially identifying the importance, as you said, like this the ag tech and agriculture. We just had a conversation last week with Harris in Northeast Nigeria, and in his region, number one sector is agriculture, and he's really excited to see innovation happen really fast there, especially through the pandemic, how things have really accelerated with technology adoption, and then also since he's so close to the a large port, so it's really interesting. I know that he would certainly love connection to, or at least learning more about what you're doing. And he's one of our new directors too.
Sure. Sounds amazing.
So yeah, maybe you could get us caught up just real quick on what your ecosystem there kind of looks like as far as sectors, how busy it is, maybe how long your chapter's been around.
So I've been a chapter director since 2018. I started to build the community while I was in teaching at the college, like I said before. So my chapter to begin with was Startup Gun U, But then when I left the college, I realized that being a citizen of the fourth largest city in Israel, after the big trio, which is Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, then comes Rishon Lezion. And what bothers me the most all the time is that even though we are the fourth largest city in Israel, we are still considered a suburb of Tel Aviv.
Okay.
So I thought to myself, you know what? Let's help those guys in the city who are working really hard to promote entrepreneurship within, instead of telling everybody I come from Tel Aviv, although I was born and raised in Tel Aviv. So our ecosystem right now is kind of small, but it is being developed real quick with a lot of projects that are being done by the new mayor that we picked about a couple of years ago. So we have a lot of projects about industrial zone and high-tech zones and everything else. So you see nowadays a lot more entrepreneurs, instead of going and starting their business in Tel Aviv, which is also only like 20, 30 minutes drive away, they stick in and staying in the city. So we're trying to build on that, and we think that we have a lot of advantages, especially since sitting in traffic, commuting for like 2 hours each direction is a bad thought. So we think we have a lot to build up on, and then right now we're promoting very hard for more startups to be funded in the city and to be founded in the city.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that, of course, people being spun out of the large cities also. So are there some people being attracted to the not the suburb, but the fourth largest city?
So the thing is that just like any other city, like I mean, Tel Aviv is like the New York City of Israel. Okay, so living in Tel Aviv can be quite expensive. Talking about rent is ridiculous. Like if you want to rent in one of the better parts of the city, one bedroom, in even if you have one or two roommates, it costs a lot of money. It can be $600-700, maybe even more. So youngsters today are struggling to live in Tel Aviv, and for even for the same, let's say, facility, you can pay fraction of the price if you stay within the city. So they're trying to basically make the city. It used to be any kind of suburb city that old folks or families. But today you see more and more young people drinking in bars all over the city. So we're trying to build on that. It is hard, it is challenging, but we're up for the challenge.
Sure. So if with those challenges, oftentimes comes the challenge of talent. So if we're putting together a team and we're starting something up there locally, is it pretty popular for people to try to find talent locally also, or are we pulling talent from the other cities or even regionally or outside of Israel?
Well, Israel is basically, as you can see in the map that you're just showing, we are kind of an island
Hmm.
per se. Okay. So if you think about that, some of our neighbors are not that friendly, but I'm not going to get into politics too much, although it's easy for me as an Israeli to talk about that. I see entrepreneurship as something that, really builds bridges and not destroy them. So I'm not going to talk about that.
Hmm.
But the reality is that we are kind of an island. And that is why most of the startups, just like our colleague Hugo said, that it's kind of strange the way the mindset of the Israeli entrepreneurship works. Um, every startup that we start right here in Israel is born global on the spot.
Right.
So you look at other markets, because our market is kind of small, and you cannot really trade around the continent. And the same goes for Rishon Lezion. So Rishon Lezion is a big city, but nevertheless, most of the people who are living in it are working outside of the city. I would say the majority work in Tel Aviv. So it's kind of hard to tell us somebody who is making an instant living, you know what, come and work for a company outside of Tel Aviv, because that's where the big money is. And that is another challenge. But again, we are seeing a movement towards many people really looking forward to build businesses and stay within the city, and that is a good sign.
Cool.
Tal, I have a couple of questions at this stage, particularly about your ecosystem. You mentioned that you feel that Israel is a bit of an island, and what we have in common is we have several smaller countries around the world who also have this sense of being almost islands, whether they are geographically isolated or surrounded by sea, or they are landlocked, and so on and so forth. And what we have discovered over the years is that innovation, as you suggested, is indigenous. Both the ideas and the sources of capital come from within that community, so to speak. That's a first area I would like you to comment, the sources of both entrepreneurship and capital.
So thank goodness, because of the reputation of the Israeli startups being so successful. I mean, I think if you measure Israel per capita, we have the majority of the. I mean, seriously, the number of unicorns that we've been able to develop in Israel is quite amazing. Um, we have in 2019 we had, I think, double the amount of the UK, and I think 3 times as much as Germany made in the same year. This year it's been even 2020 has been even more, and we see 2021 is started with a boom. We just 3 months, not even 3 months gone, and I already know about 6 or 7 unicorns, Israeli unicorns. So thank goodness, because of that reputation, we got a lot of foreign investment coming from various parts of the world, especially from the US. You see a lot of US VCs playing in our ballpark. So although we are an island per se, that is not a problem. And the government is doing a lot to promote foreign investments. So we are in a pretty good place in that regard. Although the pandemic has been quite challenging for early stage startups, you see most investors are investing in Series C, D, E. They're not even thinking about investing in early stage startups. I'm not even talking about seed. I'm talking of pre-seed. That's like nobody is investing in pre-seed anymore. But all in all, we are doing quite good in this area. So you see a lot of money coming, and when we see all the time a lot of investments in startups.
Do these investors invest in pre-seed, seed, Series A, I mean, or they vary? I mean, what does the? I mean, let's assume, for instance, that Corey and I came to Rishon and we said, okay, we have a great idea. We'll come to you and we say we're looking for seed capital. Would that be something that would be readily available if the idea was interesting?
Um, that is a good question, because as I was talking about the good things, there is I mean, there's pros and cons for everything. But the bad side of the picture is that in Israel it's a seller's market when you're talking about venture capital. Um, I think we are the number one nation with startup per capita in the world. We're talking about, we know there are about 8 to 9 thousand startups in Israel at the moment, for a country with 9 million people. But you need to take into account that the number is probably twice as much because of those, garage startups, the ones we don't know about. So think about such a small country with so many startups. So it's usually a feeding frenzy. Okay, it's quite hard to raise your first dollar. It's quite
So,
easy. It's quite easy to raise your $100 million, right? It's really easy. You see that all the time in Israel, but it's really hard to raise your first buck.
okay, so the first sources of capital are going to be personal savings, friends, and family, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So once you have raised that, you've gone through the proof of concept, then are you better prepared, or are you more quote unquote eligible to attract third party capital?
It really depends. It depends on your vertical.
Okay,
Depends on your potential. It depends on a lot of things.
like
Sometimes.
everywhere else. I mean,
Well,
both a beauty context, but also a survivor's choice, so to speak.
absolutely. And the problem is that, as you know, VCs, and you probably do, okay, they tend to invest in the sexier startups, always. Okay.
Right, right.
If we just talked about Agritech, so you see that although it's a very hot trend right now, still you will look at VCs and they are going for the cybersecurity startups. They're going into those deep technology startups. They're going into those fintech startups. Um, because one thing, it's trendy and it's sexy, and the second thing, if you want to invest in agritech, that's a lot more, let's say, there's a lot more issues to cover before doing that. You need to learn a lot. It's a very, very hard subject.
Sure,
and
sure, of
and
course.
and as you know, the age of farmers is, today the average age in the US is about 60.
I will come to this in a moment because agriculture is not only an important sector, it's going to get even more important given the population growth that we had ahead of us and given the limitations of both water and arable land. But let me go back for a moment. So, in terms of sources of capital, again, you have both foreign capital, but also you have indigenous capital in terms of government policies encouraging investments in startups and so on and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit about the sectors that you see now as emerging? I mean, of course, we know neuroscience, we know cybersecurity and all that. We hear that all the time. But give us a little bit more color as to the sectors that are now booming in Israel.
So for that, I need to take a few steps backwards, if you don't mind.
Of course.
So you see, one of the great things and the not so great things about our country is the army service. So basically, when you are 18, if you are male, then you need to do 32 months. If you are female, you need to do about 18 to 22 months. It depends on your profession. And during that time, you learn a lot. Okay, I was a tank gunner. Did that 3 years mandatory and about, I would say, 15 years as reserve. You learn a lot. You deal with $1 million of equipment. You get life and death decision when you're 19, when you're 20. So you learn a lot about responsibility, about hierarchy, but also you learn about how to think outside the box. And the number two thing, which is very important, is that you build an awesome network, you know, because we are such a small country, everybody knows everybody because of the army service. Now, if you look at the micro variable, there are units in the army, like the famous A200, like the famous State 1, which deal with technologies on a daily basis. That's what they do. They develop technologies. I'm not going to talk about which and what kind, but just to give you an idea, of course, a lot of cybersecurity is involved. Okay, and those teens, because you are relieved from the army when you are 20, 21. If you did some more time as an officer, maybe 22, 23, 24, that's when you get relieved. You get relieved with tons of experience and tons of knowledge. And most of those guys, they get this knowledge to the private market, either to startups or to huge companies like Checkpoint. And therefore, obviously, we are powerhouses in the fields of fintech, in the fields of cybersecurity, in those fields who basically, like you said, are indigenous because people just take their knowledge and their experience, and that's built through that. Um, so these are obviously the things that Israel thrives at, okay? But nowadays you see also many more, okay? Because technology is a technology. You can adapt or you can adjust the technology to other verticals, right? I mean, Waze, I hope everybody knows about Waze, okay? They thought about taking some of the stuff that they learned throughout the way from their army service and to do something which nobody thought of, right? And just, let's say, kick the ass of everybody in the let's get from point A to point B industry, right? So technology is a technology, and you can use all your skills and all your knowledge to build awesome companies no matter where. Like the best startup, that I always tend to brag that I know the founders personally is Gong. I don't know if you heard about Gong, but what they did is they've taken their huge knowledge about artificial intelligence and they used it to analyze sales calls. So what they did is every time a salesperson does something, right? Whether it's in CRM or whether it's just he's taking the phone and calling his customer and asking, hey, what's up? When are you going to sign the contract? They analyze it with artificial intelligence, and then they can give you a feedback what you're doing good and what you're doing not so good. Okay, those guys are right now, they raised about 6 months ago, I think $200 million on a $2.4 billion valuation, something like that. So think about that. This is like an all different area, right? It's enterprise. It's nothing to do with cybersecurity. It's nothing to do with homeland security, whatever. So a technology is a technology, and those guys, they are pretty goddamn smart to take their knowledge and to take their skills and use it in areas which are really, let's say, need have a lot of needs to address.
This is a very interesting example, Tal, because we're beginning to see that in a number of areas, the analysis of not only primary data, but also metadata. In other words, the first generation of, let's put it, big data analytics that started coming up in the late 90s with Google, Amazon Web Services, Facebook, and all this is now migrating to the next generation, which is analysis of metadata. And what this deep machine learning and artificial intelligence is telling us about the original data relationships. So in other words, we're talking about associative analytics, and I think this is a very interesting sector indeed. Thank you.
So this is I think, if you ask me, this is like the sexiest trend that we see nowadays in Israel. The thing that you explained so well. That is something that a lot of Israeli companies are doing very, very well. Um, Not only analyzing data, but also providing, let's say, services to enterprises, which those enterprises cannot do themselves, or they are too much of a dinosaur to think about how doing it more efficiently by themselves.
You're bringing also another point, which at the beginning of our conversations we discussed very briefly, namely thinking fast and slow. When I teach courses in behavioral finance, I always recommend to the students that they read the Daniel Kahneman's book on thinking fast and slow. And of course, the theory that Amos Tversky and Dan Kahneman put together, the ideas that we have uniquely biased behavioral perceptions about risk, and especially financial risk. And it is interesting when you look at prospect theory, which is what Amos Tversky and Dan Kahneman developed. They go back to their origins in the Israeli army as psychologists who were creating the first systems and methods of identifying leaders for the cadets. It is, I think, a unique perspective that you bring in our discussion, and thank you for that.
So my friend, her name is Inbal Arieli. She wrote a global best-selling book, which I recommend deeply. It's called Chutzpah. Now, chutzpah is the Israeli word that I think it's the only Hebrew word that has no real translation in the English language. The closest
How
that
do
we
you
can
spell it?
chutzpah is Chucpah. Now, I think the closest translation that you can think about is audacity.
Chutzpah. Yeah, of course, of course, of course.
Now,
Yep.
but if you tell an Israeli that he's audacious, he will look at you funny because that's not really what chutzpah means. Now, in her book, she explains very, very well why, ever since we are born, we are being taught to, let's say, look at the reality, and even in your, even if you're in your young age, I remember my dad used to tell me when we go and meet the teacher, I was like shivering like that. What's she gonna say? And now I'm gonna get spanked. But my father used to tap me on the back and tell me, "Look, I got your back. If she said something that you feel like she's misleading me or something, let me know. I'll spank her. I'm not going to spank you." So ever since our youngest age, um, we try to look at the reality and not accept it for what it is. And it's a part of our chutzpah. A lot of, let's say, foreign people, especially when I was working in the U.S., I was being challenged by that severely. People who would look at me would think that I'm aggressive, would think that I'm too assertive, but it's the Mediterranean weather that kind of puts us in a very different position, along with with the political situation that we're in. But when you grow up in Israel and when you go to the army, you kind of figure out that life is not that hard. And taking risk is not a bad thing. When you go to the Far East and you tell, a Japanese or a Chinese, let's do that. Let's take a risk. They said, no, I'm not going to do that. There's no way I'm going to do that. But if you tell an Israeli, let's just jump, let's bungee jump somewhere, he's going to be the first in line, because we understand that life is too short not to try everything. So you grew up in Israel with actually the understanding that it's okay to fail as long as you try again, as long as you learn from your past failures and you not do the same stupid mistakes again. And that's
Well,
why, um, by the way, the movement of fuck up nights in Israel is so big, because a lot of great entrepreneurs, amazing entrepreneurs, they have no problem coming and talking to the kids and telling them, those youngsters, you know what? I failed like 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 times before I actually done it. I know one of the great entrepreneurs, my friend, who raised like three straight great companies. One is in doing great in London, Boom 25. He, I think, failed 25 times before he succeeded. 25 times. Can you imagine that? I mean, if you talk to an American, he'll give up after the third or fourth time, for sure. 25 times he failed. He was in like, I think, $2 million debt before he was successful. So this is something that's really unique for our culture, and I think that's one of our secret sauces.
Tal, and here I have to apologize for asking you all these questions, but you're hitting the nail on the head. You just described the foundations of innovation. In other words, being risk friendly, creating a network that provides you with both intellectual input but also practical experience. In other words, both mentors and partners. Then the willingness to fail, to learn from your failures and apply the lessons. I mean, again, this is a great point that you're making. And of course, this is something that we're seeing across the board in discussions with other directors. Both the idea of building villages, building communities that you very correctly described, and also taking risk with their help and support.
I think that's a good place to land there, Yorgo. Thank you. Like when we talk about the village and then tell the village that you're curating and cultivating there, can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like this last year with your entrepreneurs that you have in your flock, right? What are some of the notable founders, entrepreneurs, or startups that are in that you tend to within your startup grind chapter? Maybe some of their pivots, or some that just couldn't make it because their customers changed and just they had to like, well, it's not reality anymore. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Absolutely. I think one of and to build on what we've just talked, I think one of the greatest abilities of Israeli entrepreneurs is their agility. Because of the culture that we have been, I mean, seriously, I hosted about a couple of years back, I've hosted people from Europe. And when we were sitting in a cafe, there was a siren, and there was a big boom over our head. Um, I mean, seriously, just going back and thinking about how they felt awful, and I can understand that. But for us, this is the unfortunate reality. Okay, so being in a pandemic, I know for the world that was kind of hard thing, adjusting to 180 degrees kind of a behavior that you need to adapt to. For us, that was easy. That was really easy. I mean, we live in a place where everything happens so fast. I mean, before you say Jack Robinson, and things just explode all of a sudden. I mean, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then for us, the pandemic, that was the same thing. I mean, of course, the world got a little crazier, right? Usually, it's just us who are crazy, but I think they adjusted pretty well. I mean, I didn't hear about too many startups who were destroyed or just got bankrupt or ceased to exist. I actually heard more startups who said, you know what, this is fun. This is great. I'm doing actually better than I did before because it was easier to convince their customers about how crucial their solution is. So I think Israeli startups once you look at the situation and you say, what the hell? I mean, we're used to it. So for them that was kind of great. But again, there are some things that you know that were not so great. Obviously, sitting at home, being isolated from parts of your families, from your friends. That's always gets you a little depressed. And I mean, entrepreneurs are such passionate people, and once you turn that down, you see a decrease in everything. But again, I think being able to survive so many you know situations that some you hear about in the news, then for us that was not. I mean, the pandemic was not like heartbroken as it was for other countries around the world.
Sure. And we're seeing that globally, especially in other regions where we're having some really great discussions, is these the trends that have been accelerated, like the digitization adoption of technology, has changed like generations in just this last year, which is we're getting the benefit of something that you, as you mentioned, you live through every day. So
I mean, just to go back a few steps to your past questions, like Israeli startups are doing so well right now in digital health just because of the situation. Everybody is moving to telemedicine, and those guys are explode. This scene has exploded. So I mean, again, if you live through the day-to-day reality of you coming to potential customers and to potential investors, and they tell you no, and then all of a sudden they try to look for your email, because they remember that they talked to you about a year or two ago. So that makes your job a lot easier.
mhm. I'd like to hear a little bit about the renovation group. You mentioned that you were interested in speaking a little bit about what the work is that you're doing, and clearly it has implications, globally, right?
So today in Israel, roughly there are about 150, let's say early to mid-stage agritech startups, agtech startups. And these guys are doing amazing things. You can split them into two. Some of them are coming from the universities. We have great institutions for agriculture all over the place, especially talking about the Weizmann Institute, which is world known for having some of the best researchers, the best agriculture researchers in the world. And then you have all those data scientists that we talked about before, what thinking about, why does a farmer needs to walk in an orchard, which is, let's say, 40 or 50 acres big, and just look at the trees and say, you know what, I think this tree needs more water and this tree is sick with a disease. Let's just put some drones up in the air. Let's do some computer vision and just give it to him on his smartphone. Why does he need to walk for 3 or 4 days and just do like that and probably miss like 90% of the faults that he has in his orchard, and just increase his yields? And just like we spoken before, by the year of 2050, I hope we'll live through it, right? All of us are kind of old in this conversation. Um, the world population is going to be 10 billion. So, and the way agriculture is operated during, let's say, the past century, harmed our planet severely. I'm not even talking about climate changes. That's been a snowball effect, right? But the gas emission and so on and so forth. So things have to change, and we need to increase yields, but at the same time use less resources to do so. Now, how do you do that? How do you do that when you know that you have more mouths to feed with each year passing? I mean, we lived in the 80s. We remember that we are the world, we are the children, right? Like half of the world couldn't even eat. Um, so the only solution to that is innovation, no other. So either you increase the yields of the farmer by giving him the technology to do so, or you building great companies that will help him deal with um, the reduction of the workforce, the resource that are that are dwindling all the time, and climate change. A lot of places where there were tons of rain, they don't have it anymore. Like I was talking to wine manufacturers and in France, they had to bring new varieties to France because they can't grow them anymore in the regions of Bordeaux and all those places. So think about the wine that you drank, you will never drink again. That's the reality because they don't get enough rain to grow those grapes. So something has to be done. And then we talked about the sexier, verticals of enterprise and marketing and sales, but farming is the essence of our lives. I mean, if you can eat, then you can survive. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to promote those startups and try to get them out of Israel as soon as we can, so they can fulfill that mission. That's what we do in the Renovation Group.
Cool. Do you have any in particular, any startups that you can tell us about that you're really excited about?
Yeah, but to do that, yeah, I'm gonna have to make you shed some tears, Corey. So forgive me to begin with.
Before you go into the names of the startups, I just want to ask you a more general question, Tal, which is what follows from your introduction. The challenge in agriculture, from what we have seen in various discussions over the last 10 years in particular, is covering products, people, and processes. In other words, we will have to modify our products, either because the old products are disappearing or becoming irrelevant, or because they are based, for instance, on animal protein, which we will need to replace it with non-animal protein. The second is the processes. We need to go away from this intensive use of water, for instance, because we don't have that much of it, or we have to find ways of preserving water and recycling it in large quantities for agriculture. The related issue, of course, is what we're beginning to see here in the US. Various university PhDs are beginning to look at scientific data, and they're realizing that the topsoil has declined. In other words, over the last 100 years, or rather last 50 years, where we have pictures of satellites, the intensive use of agriculture, especially on hills, has led to a decline of the depth of the topsoil as much as 50%, which means two things. You're beginning to use more fertilizers, and you have more negative effects by the pollution of the waterways. So these are the challenges that we're beginning to see, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you in each one of these areas examples of where you're heading.
So to connect both of your questions, let me start by talking about one of the biggest. I think it's the most. Um, I think the biggest issue that we have right now is the problem with pollination. Um, because of the urbanization process that we are still going through, and we'll probably still be going through in the next decades, the we are endangering the bees of being non-existent. And the problem with bees is that although we were able to do to them what men did to horses and chickens and so on and so forth, we weren't being able to control them to a point where we say, you know what, do this and do that. I mean, even if you are a farmer and you know the time of blossoming is coming, and you call the bee man and you tell them, look, spread some beehives in my fields, you can never know what the bees are doing and you cannot control them. They are wild animals still, right? And something that we have to understand, no bees, no food. Easy as that. I mean, you don't have enough labor, you don't have enough workforce for people to go away with whatever and just, take powder from one flower to another. That cannot be done. And so you see Israeli startups who are doing either one of the things. They either trying to um, make the bees to act more like we would like them to act by using artificial intelligence, or trying to replace them. One of the startups that I'm working with, their name is Edit. They already raised the Series A funding round. What they do is they have created artificial pollination on their own by using arms, robotic arms, who are basically doing that. So what they do is each year they take powder from flowers, they preserve this powder, and then they come with robots who spread them. And the problem with doing that is that you can't use drones because drones are not sufficient enough to go in the distance which is close enough to the flower as we speak. It might change in 3 or 4 years from now, but right now they can't do it because they can, get tangled in one of the branches. They're not clever enough at the moment. So they use arms and they're trying to replace the bees themselves. But other startups who are we working with, one of them is called, the name is Bumblebee. They're trying to get the bees to be more smart and behave as much as we would like them to be. So one day they might be just like our dogs, right? You say the dogs go there, and that's what he does because he's been trained to for thousands of years to do so. But you cannot tell the bee go and to that field. She might go to another field. They're wild. So this is number one. The second thing that we're seeing is a lot of movement towards precision agriculture. This is something that Israeli startups, again, they thrive at because just like you said, we are very good at manipulating data. Data can be quite scary when you are a farmer. Think about that. You are 60 years old. All you know how to do is grow stuff. That's what you've been doing for 40, 50, I don't know how many years. You just grow stuff. You grow corn, you grow wheat, I don't know what, doesn't really matter. And then comes, those geeks, those nerds from wherever, and they tell you, look at the data that I can give you, and it says, you know what, I don't care about data. What does that data mean to me? Okay, and it's hard work convincing him that with the help of this data, I can be a lot more efficient. But once you are able to do so, you hit the jackpot. Because again, the need is amazing. One of the companies that we work with, the name is C3, and they work sometimes with precision agriculture, with drones and with ATVs that films orchards, and they're working with companies in Brazil that have farms of 1 million trees. Can you understand that number? 1 million orange trees or 1 million lemon trees. You got to understand that number. 1 million trees, and think about that. Each tree is like a factory of its own. Sorry, and it has a life expectancy of about 50 years, and 1 year it gets enough rain to grow 100 oranges, and the other year because a pest kind of was very hungry, it can only grow 50, right? And this variation is something that, think about that you have a factory, right? Or you have 5 factories, for instance. Just think about Industry 4.0. And the only way that you know it works is by walking, on the lines, looking like that, and you go home. I mean, this is impossible, right? How can you run your business like that? But this is what they do as farmers. That there's no other way for them to do so. So you see a lot of very, very smart people, and usually they are in the age of 40, 50. They already been around, and they say, you know what, I want to create something which provides a lot of impact, a global impact, something real. That's what I want to do now that I'm 40, 50. When I was 20, 30, then I've done some social media stuff, all those sexier things. But now I want to create something that would provide a global impact, and then that's what they're doing.
Those are some really great examples. And this is I'm really excited to hear about all the stuff that you're involved with. I didn't. This is some of the one of the best reasons why Yorgo and I really enjoy this is because we love just discovering who's in the community and what they're doing. Yorgo, before, do you have any other questions on this particular topic before I move on?
Yeah, with regard to the examples that Tal brought together, in both cases, you're looking at the processes and the human capital involved. What about the products themselves? You mentioned your discussions with the French wine farmers. Can you talk us a little bit more? Because I think this is something that I haven't heard for some time. I'm aware, of course, of the GMOs and how the agricultural giants are looking research into the next generation of the various types of corns and wheats and soybeans and so on. But what you're talking about is something new. Can you talk a little bit about it as an example of where agriculture is heading?
Yeah, well, you're looking at two things. First of all, and I'm very much with you on the alternative protein movement. So today in Israel, we are world leading in what you say printing meat. Okay, so in my opinion, in 10 years from now, we will not be eating real meat. We will be eating meat that was produced in a lab because we cannot continue doing that. I mean, I mean, you see me, I mean, I'm eating a lot of meat, but I can understand why if I continue to do this, then our world will collapse eventually. We cannot keep on doing that. So in 10 years from now, there's no point in mind that the meat that all of us are gonna eat is not gonna be real meat. It's gonna be artificial meat grown in a lab. So that's number one. Number two, and this is something that also is becoming real strong, is you see new kind of startups, either biological startups or chemical startups. For instance, I've been working with a startup called Agritech, and what she's done, she's a chemist, by the way, and she's been able to find a substance when you break it in a closed environment, in a pallet of like strawberries, you can increase the life expectancy of a strawberry in 3 days. I think that is if I make a calculation, that is something like $100 billion if it works. Because think about that. Today, the world leader in producing strawberries is China. But they cannot export any strawberry. It can't be done. Because it takes like 6 or 7 days, even if you take a plane, to reach from China to Europe or you name it. And then the strawberry is just will never survive. So if she can if she can do that, think about how, I mean, this is a game changer. Mm-hmm. So this is number two. And number three is obviously genetics. You see people basically breeding new type of varieties that can be, I mean, that are able to live with less water or more, they can handle pests better. and stuff like that. I used to kid myself. One day somebody is going to invent an orange with spikes, just like roses. I was, I think, 20 at the time. I wish I knew what's going on right now when I kid myself back then. I might be a billionaire by now. So this is the three areas that I think by 2030 we'll see a lot of impact.
I think the largest impact, like you're saying, is because just the scale of food production, and then the risk that everything is rotting as soon as it's picked, right? Like it's a perishable good. We have a very interesting, we have a fun startup here in Michigan where they developed a sensor that goes inside shipping containers that contain apples to tell you if they're rotten or not, or how much more life expectancy they have, because for some reason, I don't know, and before this time, this is just years ago, the only way, if you have a field of, say, shipping containers, all filled with apples, the only way to understand which containers have apples that need to be moved first, because they're the oldest apples, you have to actually open the container. And then, of course, as soon as you open the container, you contaminate the interior. And so if you open a container and it's new apples, you're like, oh, okay, well, those are new apples. I shut the container. And now you've altered the environment inside, right? And to solve that problem is, again, a planetary billions of dollars, right? It's just wild the impact of these small innovations can make, right? Um,
So quality control nowadays in agriculture was something that in the past they had no idea about. They just ship it out.
yeah, yes,
I mean,
tell the 20%
seriously,
you
the the
can and
the
throw the rest
the, the
away.
4.0, 5.0 revolution that we all been talking about, it's just reaching agriculture right now. And if you think about that, it should have been the first industry to go through this process. But that's reality.
Yeah. So we have just a few minutes left, and there's one question that we always we ask everybody at the end, and that is, what can the global uh, collection of startup grind directors do for Tal? What can we do for your ecosystem?
Promote it, basically. I mean, every time you talk about Israel, the first name in mind is Tel Aviv. And again, I was born and raised in Tel Aviv. I have no, I have no problem with that. My folks still live there. But again, if you're thinking about agriculture for a second, I mean, other than, and I wish we could have talked about that also, about urban and about indoor agriculture and vertical farming and stuff like that. But we have no time. That's the way it is. But if you think about that, there's no agriculture in the big cities, right? Other than those kind of tricks. So you need to get out of those rural areas and look for global impact and innovation even outside of those cities. And that's what we're trying to do in Startup Grind and in the Renovation Group.
Yes, we have some fun um, incubators here, some ag incubators in the Chicago area that are working deeply with like that vertical farming for urban areas. Tom Dennison, our chapter director there, would know a lot more about what they're doing specifically, but we have some here in Grand Rapids because our regions are so connected. Any last thoughts, Yorgo, Tal?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Tal for taking the time to be with us today. It sounds that he's very busy, very happily busy. About 2 years ago, one very cold night, I was outside Grand Rapids in Gordon Foods. Gordon Foods had bought 3 years ago a startup in New York that were using dripping technologies within containers, isolated containers, to build the next generation of herb farming. And they're doing very well. I was surrounded at 8 o'clock in the evening by very young biologists, bioscientists, and I can only imagine the excitement that you have ahead of you. Well, congratulations, Tal, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. By the way, drip irrigation was invented in Israel.
I'm
So
aware of
that's
that.
that's a great closure to our
I'm aware of
conversation.
that, and that's why I brought it up. And thank you.
So it's great. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys. We should do that more often.
Yes, we've started it. We've done about 120 of these conversations, and now we've actually started to do where we're checking back in with a couple of directors. So we look forward to seeing you in the next couple months. Best of luck with everything, and um, just really grateful for the generosity of your time, Tal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys. Have a good luck, eh? And stay healthy.